Craig Rucker, you wrote a piece for Newsmax this week. The headline of it is "Time to Net Zero USA Out of UN Climate Meetings." Why don't you explain that piece and why you think that's time for the United States to net zero out of this?
I think that for a long time we've been coming here, and really, I think it's a lot of the delegates that are coming back, even that are against what we're doing with CFACT, which is try to bring climate realism into these conferences, are saying they're a waste of time. They're all about money. They're not really getting anything done. If you were worried about climate change and you really thought the world was going to burn up from it, these conferences aren't going to help you. They're not spending enough. They're claiming they need $1 trillion. They have already in place since 2009 a green climate fund that's supposed to be $100 billion. So what have they raised? They've raised $13.5 billion toward their climate cause. So it's wholly inadequate. Countries are not going to continue to give more. So if you're on that side, the actions that are being taken are not going to get you where you want. Now, for those of us who are climate realists, which I think that the trend is going to go more that way with Donald Trump being president. These things are just infringements on our liberty, as Mark mentioned, taking away our meat. They're brainwashing young people about fears about the future, and they're just a waste of money. So you're right. They're giving bureaucrats a vacation, but they're not tangibly accomplishing anything other than just alarming the public, alarming the grassroots that are climate activists in the various nations. It's just a negative. So let's just pack up our bags, go home, call it a day. It was a good experiment. The Paris Accord's a failure, and nations aren't going to reach it.
Yep. And I would just add the narrative is critically important there. Trump 1.0, 2017. Well, we'll renegotiate the UN Paris Agreement. We got a good deal. And you had Rick Perry, the energy secretary, urging him to stay in. You had Rex Tillerson urging him to stay in. The only one who in his administration I'm aware of was Scott Pruitt, who was vocally saying we should pull out. Trump 2.0 is like, we're out. This is a scam. It's a hoax. And let's hope he submits this, the UN Paris Pact to the Senate for ratification, which would then, when they reject it, nullify the whole, if I'm understanding this legally correct, nullify the whole UN climate process, which began under George H.W. Bush, Republican president, back in 1992. And that was ratified, by the way, by the Senate on a voice vote. So we don't even know who to point our fingers at as who ratified that Senate. We don't have I don't think we have a roll call.
Well, it was non-binding in 1992. It wasn't even binding. They didn't make it binding until several years later. So they just thought they were signing a nothing burger, had no idea it would grow into the Kyoto Protocol and then the Paris Climate Accord. So I don't know as though these things are going to go anywhere. I mean, nation states, part of the COP process is they're supposed to up their ante every few years. They call them NDC, nationally determined contributions. That's part of the Paris Accord. Most of the nations have submitted them already for 2030, saying they're going to get rid of a certain amount of climate emissions by that time. They're supposed to up the ante. I think the only ones that I was aware of that did while we were there were Brazil and the United Kingdom. They're moving. They're going to become 70 or 81% carbon neutral. They're going to reduce their greenhouse gases by 81% by the year 2035. Nobody believes this, and if they do, it's going to be accounting tricks. And so we'll see what winds up happening. But they're just throwing numbers in the air. Nobody believes them. And as far as the developing countries, the reason they're going to pull out is they're not going to get the money that they need. They've established now what they call a loss and damage fund. This is for adaptation. These are for countries that are experiencing typhoons, wildfires, whatever. They're supposed to be able to dip into this fund to pay for things that have been happening since time began, but now they call it climate. They want $20 billion. This is in addition to the Green Climate Fund. They've raised thus far less than one. And I don't see that they're even going to get anywhere near this. So the developing countries are going to get tired of this and go home. In my opinion, the whole thing's been a failure.
Wow.
It's not just $20 billion. It's $20 billion annually.
Right.
Right. I mean, I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, Craig, that as part of the Paris Climate Agreement and the year after's follow-up, countries had agreed to the Green Climate Fund. It was $100 billion a year beginning when? 2020. 5 years after the Paris Climate Agreement. They've never even approached or come close to hitting that target. And the funds that they do accumulate every year, there's been repeated reports showing they can't even account for 40% of the spending. There's no tracking. There's no modern accounting. And some of the things they have found they're being spent on, it's hardly to say, oh, these are climate mitigation. When you're spending Italian money on gelato shops in developing countries, or love stories filmed in Colombia, that doesn't sound very climate mitigation to me. So not only is the money not there, they missed the target for more than 5 years now by a tremendous margin. And there's no reason for thinking their new targets will be any more likely to be hit.
Yeah,
but they might have good toilet seats.
Yeah, that's true. Let me get to one last one. This actually, this last story I have in our notes applies to this. This is from the Daily Caller. They're basically just they're reporting on something that was in the Financial Times, and it says foreign officials push for global climate taxes at UN summit ahead of Trump's second term. Foreign government officials attending the ongoing UN climate change summit are advocating for de facto global climate taxes to fund green energy development in poor countries ahead of Donald Trump's return to the White House, according to the Financial Times. Officials from countries including France, Spain, and Kenya are pushing a plan, are pushing to plan so-called solidarity levies on various industries at this year's conference, so that a more developed version of the scheme can be presented at next year's get-together in Brazil, Financial Times reported. The idea is to settle on a plan that would raise $100 billion or more annually to fund climate-related efforts in developing countries by imposing de facto taxes on the shipping and aviation industries and possibly other sectors as well. Some of those other sectors include levying taxes on cryptocurrency trades, fossil fuel production, plastic producers. Billionaires and financial transactions could possibly be subject as well to the solidarity levies scheme. Craig and well, everybody on the panel here, we've heard this before. This seems to me to be the 458th different funding scheme for supposedly climate mitigation, so that the developed world, the wealthy countries in the world, just start shoveling cash to developing countries that do not have any accountability and are basically klepto states. Is this going to actually happen? Is this, this apparently they want to try to get this at the end. I know you guys will be watching to see if a resolution saying this passes.
I mean, we already kind of do this, right? Like it's not, a signed on, like laid out agreement like that, but we already send tons and tons of money to developing nations for green related projects, like infrastructure projects. If you follow, there's an account on X called Oilfield Rando, and he has a secondary account that is, I can't remember what it's called off the top of my head. If I remember it, I'll post it somewhere. But his other account just like tweets out all of the spending that our government does and like what projects it's for. And it's like, solar panels on huts in African villages, that kind of stuff. So we already do that stuff.
But we don't tax. We don't. But
it's not tied to a tax.
Like that's government tax, spending. Right. So it's a tax on consumers, or more likely in the U.S. a tax on future people as yet unborn, because it's all done with deficit spending. But they're talking about a direct tax on particular industries, and there may be a few countries that have done that. I think the EU has got a the airlines tax. But does anyone think even this Congress can get that through, much less the next Congress?
No, they won't. I mean,
good luck there.
UN's been doing this for decades. Going back a ways, they called it the Tobin tax, where they wanted almost like a sales tax on things. Like any government institution, it's in the business of growing itself and finding new sources of revenue. And just depending on contributions every year is a tough way to go. But so if they can get a tax, They'll push for it. I don't think they'll be successful ultimately. I mean, green climate fund's a case in point. I think that you're going to find the same with this loss and damage fund, but it doesn't keep them from trying. And who knows, I think from their perspective, maybe one day they'll hit gold and the right leaders will be in place and they'll sign off on something like this.
Yeah, they've been pushing these kind of global taxes for decades. And certainly no one's going to try that in the next 4 years under Donald Trump, because if you can't tax the U.S. And the U.S. isn't part of it, no other country is going to be part of it, which brings up that whole Trump effect, which made this into like a funeral effect of this conference. All these ambitious ideas, I think they're just going through the motions. They know it's not going to happen because of that. And I just wanted to read one leader, was a UN advisor, turned on the UN and said, these COP conferences have become meaningless rituals which don't actually deliver anything. And this was the CBC Canada reporting this. This was their headline. And of course, Greta long ago renounced the UN as nothing but a scam and greenwashing. And I think we can all agree with Greta Thunberg on that. So I think this whole idea of the global taxes, again, they're just going through the motions. This is what they have to do. They're already excited, geared up for Belém, Brazil next year. They're going into the rainforest to follow Joe Biden when he disappeared into the trees. Maybe we're going to find Biden, kind of like find Waldo. Where's Waldo next year? But that's where the next one's going to be.
Awesome. Do you not think that it's going to produce more carbon going to Belém, Brazil, than it would take going to Sao Paulo or
Belém's much nicer. You can actually go out in the jungle. Now we'll need vaccines. We're going to need yellow fever, malaria pills, and a couple others because you're going. That's deep in the jungle there.
They're going to have to build but they're going to have to build a lot of infrastructure, or they're going to have to build a lot of transport from the hotels to where the conference is held. The point is, what you don't do if you're trying to reduce your carbon footprint is hold your climate conference in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah.
At least if it's a climate conference and everybody's worried about global warming, it sets the scene more being in the jungles of Brazil than it does on the Caspian Sea in the former Soviet Union, which was quite cold at times. So I give them credit for that. I think the activists will have more free reign. The last couple of years being in places like Egypt and United Arab Emirates and in Azerbaijan, there wasn't a whole lot of activists outside. You got in serious trouble if you did any of that. So any protests really were confined inside of the conference for the most part, other than one dead whale.
Yes, I was say we have to mention the fake dead whale. Tell them that.
No, you go ahead.
Well, we thought it was real. What's funny was, in order to make it smell like a dead whale, they put dead fish around it. And of course, I pointed this out. I just factually reported that. And everyone on Twitter is like, a whale's not a fish. A whale's not a fish, which is a good point. Why are they making a dead mammal? Why are they putting dead fish around it? But that's what they did. It looked so real. This was laid out right in the town square, not far from a Rolls Royce. By the way, Azerbaijan is the ultimate of the net zero, Great Reset, World Economic Forum, UN vision. You have very wealthy oligarchy. You have city block after city block, Rolls Royce, Armani, Gucci, the nicest stores that rival anything you see on Beverly Hills or Bethesda, McLean, or Fifth Avenue in the United States. And then you leave a couple things and you get to dire poverty, crumbling infrastructure. And they even had not only stray cats and dogs to the streets, but I went running one day and ran into a stray cow. And I'm not making that up. It was a cow wandering the streets. I was telling the guy at the hotel, what's a cow doing out there? I don't know. It's running loose. So what happened was they picked the wealthiest area to put this dead fake whale in. I don't know what it was made of. It was an amazing looking whale. And in the distance, and Alex Newman was there, John Robson was there at Canada. So there's a couple other skeptics actually that made the trek. But they had a big sign in the background, like a building, and you could actually see an offshore windmill, which you'd think as Americans, we'd think, oh my gosh, this is people protesting offshore wind. No, they were saying global warming is causing dead whales, and that's why they were out there. But it was an amazing stunt, amazing, I guess you'd call it, I wouldn't say animation, but amazing just
sculpture.
God, it looked truly like a dead whale.
And he's totally right. Wealth on the inside, poverty on the outside, cats and dogs. They were eating the cats. They were eating the dogs.
Yeah, I knew that was coming. Look, global warming is so bad and the sea levels have risen so much that even open ocean whales are now finding their way into the Caspian Sea, apparently. Right. So, yeah. All right, we're ready for Q&A, or one of our favorite parts of the show as well, when our audience gets to ask us questions and kind of direct the end of the show here. So Linnea, this is your specialty.
Sure
Let's
thing.
go.
Okay, so we have a good mix of questions here. One's for our guests and also kind of general science questions. I'll start with one of those. This is from Rico Man, who I have not seen ask questions in the past. So welcome to the show, Rico. He says, only one climate alarmist claim makes sense to me, human-induced or natural, is the rise of CO2 from 280 parts per million to 400 and increasing too fast for life to adapt. Is there any evidence that it is or is not?
From talking to people like Will Happer, Richard Lindzen, and Robert Giegengach, the head of the former head of the University of Pennsylvania, there have been times when CO2 has gone up rapidly, dropped rapidly. There's nothing unprecedented about the rise of CO2. I remember when Bill Nye used to always push that idea. So this is such a rapid increase. We can't adapt. Well, you can see how we've adapted. If it is any cause of it, there's been no evidence in extreme weather, and it's been a gentle warming since the end of the Little Ice Age, which according to the first UN report, we haven't even hit temperatures from the medieval warm period yet. So until they had that, we have to get rid of the medieval warm period. So there's no evidence, and there's no evidence that this is causing any harm. And then there's geologic evidence that we've had similar periods where CO2 has risen rapidly, accelerated rates, and dropped.
And to add to that, I mean, you have, for example, going back in the past, this is a point that Dr. Patrick Moore likes to make, is that the world was largely CO2 starved. Below 200 parts per million, things get pretty bad for biodiversity and life on Earth. So actually, this increase is a good thing, because historically there have been epochs and time periods where it's been upwards of 1,000 or more parts per million. So we have an idea, by just looking in the past, what type of world we will be in if it continues to rise. And actually, back in my day, they used to call that the climate optimum, because biodiversity flourished, things were well on planet Earth, and this is actually a good thing for CO2 to increase. So I don't know why the panic about the Earth returning to the way it was in the distant past is something that we need global conferences for and to panic everybody about.
Yeah, one quick ad. NOAA and the Washington Post, so people who like their government science and the corporate media, both showed a chart of the last 500 million years. You can go to Climate Depot and just search NOAA chart or Washington Post chart, and they show that we are in the coldest period of the last 500 million years temperature-wise. So there's no there in terms of alarming, and they were forced to, I don't know why they did this, and maybe Jeff Bezos at the Washington Post is having some kind of business model change of heart on climate, because it was amazing. The Washington Post did, I don't know, it came out of the blue. They had the incredible chart, and you can look at it, and it actually shows we're in one of the coldest periods of the last 500 million years, if you believe corporate government science.
Look, right. If you believe in evolution and you believe that humans evolved from earlier forms of primates, we evolved at a time when CO2 was much higher than today. And if you're worried about, and we have locations, submarines, where CO2 builds up much higher levels. It's not considered a danger until it reaches 5,000 parts per million. So much higher than ambient levels.
So Kite Man Music, this is a typo, but Kite Man Music asks, are the wheels coming off the climate change bandwagon?
Well, as someone who's declared multiple times in the past that it was over, the scam was ending, and been proven wrong, yes, it's happening again. Why not? Why not just keep making predictions that it's over? It's hard. I don't believe it's over. It can never be over. We're at COP 29. There's probably going to be a COP 39, and for all we know, a COP 49 at these UN summits. And simply because the money, the established infrastructure, what they might do is shift it. Again, there's this big movement to try to merge global health with climate. Climate will become part of global health, and that we may see in the future. So climate won't be the lead, because they know it's not working. I mean, even young people, the polling showed this last election split. There was no definitive side that all the young people went for, the climate alarmist candidates. So as someone with a horrible track record, I say, no, it's not over, but it's definitely at its low point of the last 30 years. Donald Trump's election was its low point. The key point on that is 2016, when Trump was elected, we were just starting UN Paris. Net zero was this wonderful dream. Solar and wind, cheaper. EVs were going to take over. Fast forward 8 years to 2024. Everyone knows they've been lied to. Everyone knows it's a scam. You have the EU Green New Deal put on hold, the EU elections rebuking it, the farmers in the Netherlands forming a party, the farmers spraying manure on the EU headquarters. You have the lie about EVs, and even now all the major automakers are coming out and basically saying this isn't working, and their cars are sitting on the lot. We've hit 7% sales in the US and seem to have maxed out. It's none of it. There's no there. So this is a big, scary thing, and I call it the Trump effect, because this could start unwinding it. When he was there, Argentine president talked to Trump, pulled the 170-member delegation out of the UN conference. The French foreign minister, the same day, decided not to attend the conference because of some slight by some other country. So you're just all these little signs. We need a Clegxit, a climate exit from the UN climate process, much like Britain did with their Brexit. Let's hope it can happen. We're in much better position than 8 years ago when I declared the climate scam over. So this time I'm going to try something different. It's kind of like flipping a coin. I'm going to call tails this time and see if I'm right.
Yeah, Marc Morano, you've been standing on the corner wearing a sandwich board that says the end is near for 20 straight years. And one of these years, you're going to be right.
That's right. I'll forget all the times I was wrong and just focus on the time I was right. Yeah.
That's how it works, right? I think that's how predicting the weather works. Sorry, Anthony. Here's Robert Reed, who says, I'd like to see a Heartland video on forest fires and how the majority of them, in Canada at least, are caused by people and not climate change. Robert Reed, have I a video for you? I believe I do cover that issue in a video called The Impact of Climate Change on Wildfires, which is available on this very YouTube channel. So go check that out. I just needed to do that one really fast. Okay. Above Us Only Sky asks, is it fair to say that water vapor has more of an effect on climate change than CO2? Yes.
Water vapor makes up 97% of the greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And just 2 years ago, a single volcanic eruption, undersea volcanic eruption, added 10% to the water vapor in the atmosphere. And gosh, what happened the following months and years? Oceans warmed higher than they had been. The ambient temperature, as measured by our different measurements, was higher than it had been since they've been able to measure with these modern instruments. But surely the volcano had nothing to do with that and all the water vapor out of the atmosphere.
I will say, be careful about that water vapor thing, because I actually approached a scientist at the UN meeting about that question. I said, since water vapor, isn't that the big thing? The explanation they came back to me was, that's true. Water vapor is a primary greenhouse gas, but more CO2 creates more water vapor. So they try to make a connection that our increase in CO2 causes some sort of forcing, I think the term he called it, and I didn't fully follow his logic in this, thereby causing more water vapor, so it actually compounds the problem. You have both more CO2 and it forcing more water vapor into the atmosphere. So that's a good question for Will Happer and folks of that sort to try and show them why they're wrong on that, but that's the answer I was given.
Usually the claim they're making with that is that it increases evaporation, and so you have more water vapor in the air. But it's got a pretty low residence time, I think, water vapor, so it usually falls out as precipitation pretty fast, so which leads to cooling. It's all fun stuff. Okay, here's one for you, Mark, from Energy Colonizer. He asks, what were the portions or the rations of meat in those food lines at COP29? A max of 1,500 calories of low protein gruel, or all you can eat?
Well, they had both. There was no all you can eat. I don't know about maybe one of the restaurants, but the food buffet, you had a buffet and you say, give me a little this and that. I guess they could have waited. I don't remember, but I got a hot dog and I got some kind of meat dish. The problem is they weren't overly generous. Certainly, I love the food in Azerbaijan because it was just all kinds of great meats, including chicken and beef, including liver as well, which you can't really find liver at many restaurants, but you can there. But what they did is they put meat and then pile it with all this rice, or they'd give you a hot dog with giant buns on it. And I think I had a video of just the hot dog. I ended up just eating the meat outside and tossing the bread, and ate the meat off the top and tossed the rice. So I ended up buying multiple meals to get enough meat. So they were skimpy on the meat.
All righty.
No bugs, though.
No bugs.
No bugs were
No
served.
bugs.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay, so Miles asks, any word on Clintel International Climate Conference in Czech Parliament in Prague officially declares climate emergency at an end? How many are involved? Not totally sure what this question is. It's a little,
yeah, that
the
was
wording is a little odd.
During COP29. I think it was over 100 of the scientists attending that conference in Czech Republic signed a declaration during the COP29, basically saying the climate emergency does not exist and is over and all that. And so that, of course, was completely ignored by the mainstream media. And I covered it at Climate Depot, and some other climate skeptical sites covered it. But it just goes to show you, Europeans are starting to speak out more and more. The Polish parliament, Viktor Orban's government, and you're seeing it with, again, the citizens groups from the farmers on. What we need is this kind of narrative change. If you go look at what, like, the UK is one of the worst offenders before, now that Nigel Farage is ascendant, no, it's not the case anymore, but they would have that UK fires report 2019 was completely bonkers, talking about stopping new airports, regulating carbon dioxide as you would asbestos. And the conservative members of the House of Parliament there were going over it, the House of Commons, and they were going over it. Well, of course, we all agree with net zero, but, this may have gone a little too far here. They were so timid and afraid. They were all Benji backers in terms of accepting the narrative. There's a problem, a crisis, but we're just going to push back a little. That whole mindset needs to change, and I think it is slowly changing, and that's where Donald Trump comes.
And it's going to change in the Eastern Europe. I mean, I appreciate what James Taylor's doing at Heartland. We are working as well. We did a conference in Austria earlier this year. I think it's going to be the Hungarians, it's going to be the Czechs, it's going to be the Poles. Much like in this country, who really led the revolution? It's the red states. And I think it's going to be the kind of red nations, if you would, in Europe that are going to get them out of the dark ages, because they still clamp down hard. We have good allies in France and in Germany. They're fighting the good fight, but they still receive a lot of oppression over there.
Will the failing series of COPs actually allow for a factually rather than politically correct summary for policymakers for AR7?
I don't think so. No.
They
can't. That's their core, their center. They're never going to allow that. They've got to keep those reports as alarmist as possible. In their minds, that's the only way you get the politics to follow. So they're not going to allow that. What I wish would happen is Donald Trump pulls out of everything, but requests to go. I'd love to see Donald Trump go and give, I think it was 2019, his speech to the World Economic Forum, where he compared the climate alarmists to fortune tellers. I love him to go to COP and give a devastating speech. It's never been done, and it would be awesome, but I don't know if they'll allow him in if we pull out. They'll probably ban him, as well as, I can't even believe we're allowed in, frankly.
We have been kicked out numerous times, but somehow find ourselves back in these. We thought actually bringing MAGA hats in would be kind of stirring things up. We were never more surprised than when all the developing countries loved it. Now, we did get some kind of different looks from people from France, Germany, those types of countries. But on balance, it was almost a little disappointing. We were actually received, very warmly in this place, which we were unaccustomed to. So,
if I were you guys, because I've seen the wanted posters, I would stay out of any country they hold a COP in that is part of the International Criminal Court after what happened yesterday, because they might clap the cuffs on you and send you to The Hague for trial for the climate crimes.
Well, until that day, we're going to be on this show, and they know where to find us, I suppose.